I'd like to introduce our next keynote speaker. The keynote this afternoon is called Happy Birthday, Clean Tax Cuts, 1 year and 8 Charrettes older and wiser. And clean tax cuts is now CTC. So if you have an acronym, you've made a lot of progress. So Rod Richardson, come on up. Rod is the president of the Grace Richardson Fund. He writes for the American Spectator, and he's part of a movement that's pushing an agenda to help address carbon and clean energy and all the sustainability questions we have from the right side of the aisle. So I'll turn it right over. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. You don't actually have to sing happy birthday, but this is the 1 year anniversary of the first public presentation of the clean tax cuts concept anywhere. So it's been quite a ride since then, and we've gotten quite a lot of folks involved in this charrette process. Can I have a show of hands? How many people in this room have been involved in a clean tax cut charrette so far? You got a bunch of people over there, or there. So wait a minute. Yeah, that's right. Oh, good. Wow. Okay, we got some extra people. That's yes. So a year ago it was just me and a crazy idea that I didn't know if other people would want to listen to. And at this point, I guess over 200 really smart people have participated in the charrette process and produced a lot of ideas. For those who don't know who I am or what I'm doing, let me back up a little bit. I'm Rod Richardson. I'm with the Grace Richardson Fund, and what we do is we pioneer new free market policy solutions to critical issues that are in gridlock. And I spoke about this last year, but I'll just briefly recap that the reason why I have that orientation is that I come from a fundamentally conservative policy background. In the 1980s, I was on the grants board of the Smith-Richardson Foundation, which was run by my dad at that time. And during the 1970s and the 80s, the Smith-Richardson Foundation had a strategy of addressing the issues of the day and trying to find new conservative solutions to those. And in so doing, they pioneered many ideas which tipped. The neoconservative intellectual revolution, the supply-side economics, monetarist economics, ideas like school choice, all the dissidents around Solzhenitsyn and Sakharov, the guys around the Solidarity movement in Poland, the Czech uprising in Czechoslovakia, the work of Hernando de Soto in Peru. In fact, how many of you have read the book Tipping Points by Malcolm Gladwell? Do you guys remember the idea of broken windows, which is the example of an idea that tipped? And that is, in fact, the work of James Q. Wilson, who was on the grants board with me for 10 years on the Smith-Richardson Foundation. So we did nothing but make new ideas tip and address the issues of the day. And in the 1990s, I got out of the world of philanthropy and then came back to it in the late 2000s when I became the sole trustee of the Grace Richardson Fund. And I had to decide what to do with this foundation, which was ending a healthcare mandate, and I was doing something new with it. So I looked around at the world of conservative philanthropy, and I realized that something had really changed, that these guys were no longer addressing the issues of the day with new ideas. They were denying that the issues of the day existed. And this seemed like to me to be completely an intellectually bankrupt way to proceed, because if you don't generate new ideas, you are going to eventually become intellectually irrelevant, and your movement will be taken over by demagogues, which I think may have happened. So I determined that the best thing that I could do as a conservative who really thought that there were good conservative ideas that applied to many different issues in areas like healthcare and foreign policy and security issues, and also climate and the environment, and that made sense. So I thought that there were ideas that could bring the left and the right together. Because these were issues that needed to be addressed, but the only way to bring the conservatives in was to really approach them with really conservative ideas. Because, with all due respect to Katrina, who I appreciate that there are genuine conservatives who support the carbon tax, most conservatives, when they hear a carbon tax or price support subsidies or regulation, will hear higher taxes, more spending, bigger government, and they hear left-wing agenda. So, you need, in order to not turn, when you try to get conservatives to become part of this coalition and you get them to care and then you tell them what the solutions are, you often lose them at the solutions. And it doesn't matter how you dress it up or what language you use. You use energy innovation and American energy independence and all the great catchphrases you want. They will have a fundamental, as I said last year, there's one word that conservatives really, really hate, and that's tax, right? So if you want to use that word, reuse tax cuts, and you will, get the conservatives to come along with you much, much more easily. So, but in any event, for those of you who are not familiar with the clean tax cuts concept, this is really pure supply-side economics in its conception, in that we're targeting exactly the most distortionary taxes that Katrina was talking about, the taxes that investors pay on debt and equity. And if you do that, you can have a really interesting effect on bringing down the cost of capital and then bringing down the cost of outputs, so that you can accelerate capital to these new kinds of clean solutions. Now, when I was here last year, I was very fortunate that one of the people in the audience was Amory Lovins. And Amory was very interested and intrigued, and he took me aside and talked to me for 3 hours. He showed me the bananas that he's growing in his house with no internal heating at 6,000 feet, and impressed me. The guy figured anybody who could do that must be a genius. And he told me that he thought this idea was really intriguing, and that what we really should do was a charrette. And I said to him, "Great, Amory, what's a charrette?" And he explained to me what a charrette is. If any of you don't know what it is, it's this meeting they do in architecture. It comes from the Sorbonne in the Middle Ages in France. The architect students would put their finished scale model of a cathedral in a cart to go to the professor, and they would, in their, trying to get it done before the deadline, they'd get into the cart to put on the finishing touches, and they were said to be en charrette. So this term, en charrette, became a joking term which meant a working group meeting. And they do it in architecture all the time. They last, between 1 to 3 to 4 days. And they, it has a design purpose. You don't leave that meeting until you have solved the design problems. Amory and Rocky Mountain Institute had been doing this for years with energy efficiency projects, and I think that Amory was itching to apply this to public policy. And I was his guinea pig, because here was a guy with an interesting idea, and from the get-go you could take this idea and develop it with charrette process. So that's what we did. We held our first charrette at Columbia with the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law, and with the Rocky Mountain Institute and the Grace Richardson Fund, and 35 of some of the smartest people I ever met, including a few people in this room, Hutchison and many others. Katrina was there at that charrette as well. Ripped the idea apart and put it back together again and pointed it in some interesting directions. Before I knew it, we were pointed in new directions that I had not previously anticipated. Different people over the next few weeks, as they digested the results of that, stuck up their hands and said that they would take different parts of this on. The first people to jump forward was R Street, taking on the transportation sector. And that was because we had a very bright guy from SASB, Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, who pointed out, among other great insights that he had, was that transportation would be one of the easiest places to apply clean tax cuts. Because in the transportation sector, you had very clear metrics from CAFE. The CAFE reporting standards allow us to know the average vehicle fleet efficiency of every manufacturer. So you can simply take that number and turn it into a tax rate, maybe with a little tweaking to make it, more precise. But the higher the vehicle fleet efficiency, the lower the tax rate. And if you apply that at the level of the taxes that investors pay, capital gains, dividends, you have a tool to drive the entire automobile sector cleaner because they're rewarded with lower tax rates to the degree they become cleaner. And actually, the companies that sell the most energy efficient automobiles have a competitive advantage. They have a lower cost of capital. They pay less taxes. They are accelerated above their competitors. So it's a completely different view that looks at a fundamental question of capital acceleration. And this tied in with one of the reasons that I did not come forward with this idea prior to last year. I was waiting for something to happen, and it happened in 2015. In 2015, both wind and solar became cheaper than fossil fuels by LCOE, according to the Lazard 9.0. Study of LCOE, levelized cost of electricity. That means, that study is interesting, to me what that means is that it means that every single climate policy that has been developed over the last 30 years is now slightly off base and going to become increasingly more off base. Because every one of those policies is based on the idea that clean solutions cannot be profitable, right? That's the underlying assumption that was true 10, 20, 30 years ago, that those solutions would not be profitable. But now they are profitable. They're becoming increasingly profitable, and we will be more profitable. That means that price adjustment mechanisms aren't necessarily the most effective tool. What you really need is capital acceleration. And that's what we were finding we could do through these charrettes. One of the best ideas that came to the fore was the ideas of Professor Travis Bradford at Columbia. As a traditional supply sider, I was focused on equity. I was focused on the stockholders, the owners, and their tax rates. But Travis said to me, no, really, actually, even a better place to apply this is in the debt markets, in the capital markets. Because all these other things you're looking at, like the automobile industry, they can supply clean solutions, but they're on the demand side of capital. They're demanding money. But the green bond market is on the supply side of capital. So you can have a very powerful effect if you put it there. He pointed out that if you reduce the cost of capital by 2 or 3 percentage points, which you can do with a tax cut, right? You could reduce the cost of outputs 20 or 30%. So that's 20 or 30% cheaper clean electricity, cheaper electric cars, things like that. So you're actually directly incentivizing these things without any substitution effect. It's just a direct, acceleration. So the green bond charrette, we had 7 different charrettes that were held. The plan became to conduct 7 different charrettes in order to come up with actionable plans in 7 different sectors that we could bring together at Earth Day, Texas, and then quickly pivot to start to introduce these to policymakers and legislators in Washington, D.C. So it was a sort of a fast-track development approach using this charrette process. We had the Nature Conservancy doing forestry and agriculture in Washington, D.C. The R Street did transportation. Columbia did the green bond market. One Step In Foundation and the University of Colorado did the oil and gas sector, and you'll hear from the oil and gas guys afterwards. But we did, ASU, who is here, did clean tech. how to apply this to accelerate clean tech. Bill Brandt led the effort there. And we did, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy did real estate. Oh, by the way, where's Chip? Chip, oh yeah. Chip decided to host the Charrette on the power sector right here at the American Renewable Energy Institute. They did a great job. Andy Quiet was involved in that and contributed greatly to that effort. You know, we've had a lot of great people involved in some great ideas. And to give you a quick, you know, view, we've come up with a set of debt and equity side ideas that really work across a number of different sectors. The green bond idea is extremely powerful, and Travis was right. That is a winner of an idea, because what you can do is, you know, allow a corporation to issue a tax-exempt green bond, right? Which would be based on certified clean assets like a zero-emission power source or an electric car factory or something like that. And, you know, or Apple or Walmart could build wind or you know, photovoltaic farms to power their stores or their data centers. And they could finance these things at a lower cost of capital than anything else they could get. For the investor, this would be a higher tax-free return than anything you could get. So you have you're essentially creating a new class of security, the corporate or bank-issued green bond, which is tax-exempt. And it exists someplace between the muni bond, which has a low interest rate because it's guaranteed by the taxpayers, and the corporate bonds, which have a higher interest rate because they are privately guaranteed, privately backed. But this would have a somewhat higher tax return, a little less than the corporate rate, but higher than the municipal rate, and it would be tax-free. So that would be very, very attractive to both issuers and investors. The muni bond market is $3.7 trillion. The corporate bond market in this country is $35 trillion. And you've created a new class of security which is arguably more attractive than either of those. So the potential of this kind of security to leverage trillions of dollars of new financing for clean investments is huge, and this is exactly the kind of thing that we need. Most of the people who have heard this idea think it's very good, and the Atlanta Council is now thinking about doing a further charrette about taking this idea and looking at it as the possible basis for an international agreement that would make green bonds of this kind tax exempt globally, right? A very simple UN agreement. So any corporation anywhere in the world could issue these in any capital market, in any currency, getting rid of local currency risk. And for all the investors, they would be tax exempt wherever the investor is in the world. That's using globalization to help us combat climate change and all other kinds of pollution and waste. So that's one thing, and Jens has very kindly offered us a panel to report out the results of that charrette. If it happens, the Wilson Center is interested in co-hosting with that, so of course Columbia will be involved, and that should be a good one. But where are things going from here? Steve Nadell at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy is pushing strongly to bring all the results together and have a unified proposal, which he wants to, lead the charge on presenting this on Capitol Hill as a unified set of proposals on clean tax cuts, because we now have something concrete to show. And it's a little bit premature in some ways because we haven't done impact modeling on all of these ideas yet, but the clock is ticking, and we need to get these ideas out there and on the Hill. So that's one effort. We have a bunch of other, things that are in movement with the clean tax cuts thing. For instance, Sylvia Earle and Mission Blue have convinced the Grace Richardson Fund to join them in a UN SDG commitment to examine whether the problem of waste plastic can be addressed using clean tax cuts, and that will be a conversation going on in the fall. Brett Byers, who is here, is interested in the question of whether clean tax cuts can help the rainforest deforestation issues, and we think that will be a very interesting conversation, though there's a lot of challenges there to overcome in that conversation. And the Atlantic Council, as I mentioned, is doing this charrette and also wants to do a charrette on millennial leadership and clean tax cuts. In addition to that, we've got, you know, yesterday, if some of you were here, you know, we announced the formation of the Clean Capitalist Leadership Council to pull together folks who are interested in directing the next phase of clean tax cut development. And let me just say, I invite you all to come give me your input and join in if you want to. You know, this idea has been, it is not my idea anymore. This is the idea of some 200 people who have participated in it and changed it and shaped it along the way. You know, we have been very open to the suggestions of everybody to how this should be shaped, and when people had good ideas that were consistent with the basic concept, we just brought them right in and give them full credit for the parts of it that they've done. So please, you know, come and give us your thoughts, give us your ideas, and you know, help us, tell us how to shape this going forward. But at this point, I'm going to call up, we actually have a panel, and if my panel could come and join me.